Hi, hello, welcome to Victoria's Training and Review Center. This is James Macalino Vilon, the VTRC Review Director. So for today, we will be discussing about the social sciences, the PRC-based contents. I would like to first discuss about or share with you the review techniques that we need to follow in the entire duration of our preparation for the LET. So first is our psyche or our condition, which means that we need to be sufficiently and effectively prepared for the examination through a comprehensive review or study schedule. So it is our first step to, of course, maximize our potential to pass the examination. Second is we need to obtain the official objective or the coverage for the entire examination so that we will be able to know what are the things that we need to study and what are the things that we don't need to give more attention with because they are not most likely to come out in the actual exam. So in our studying, we need to divide our review materials to be studied into reasonable sized study blocks. So we need to be very realistic that we could accomplish or complete it in a single study session setting. So based on scientific studies, 2 to 3 hours block or study session is the most effective technique. Okay? And of course, guys, we should not forget we have to maintain our good health because this is the basis of good memory retention. Thus, this is an effective review regimen. For all we know that Filipinos are very religious, so that is why we have to keep our faith and of course constantly pray for the guidance of our Almighty Creator. And of course, always have a good night's sleep, even if it's an ordinary day with you, so long as board exam is not yet finished. So you have to be relaxed and refreshed, most especially on the day of the examination. Now, to give you an overview of what will be the things that we will be discussing or the content of this presentation, we will be dealing with the basic concepts in political science, the summary of the 1987 Philippine Constitution. We will be discussing also the basic principles of economics, the basic concepts in cooperatives, as well as the introductory part of the agrarian reform. I know that we already amended and changed our tax system, so we will do away with that. And we will be discussing more on the capsulized discussion on the Philippine history. So from the pre-colonial period up to the present or in the contemporary period. Of course, the basic concepts of sociology and culture, everything about Jose Rizal, about his life, his teachings, his ideas, etc. And finally, the basic concepts of information and communication technology. Now, let's start. So, our first topic would be the basic concepts of political science. Now, when we are asked what is political science, we usually define it as the systematic study of and reflection upon politics. So politics usually describes the processes by which people and institutions exercise and resist power. Some people also define political science as the systematic study of the state and government. And the word political is derived from the Greek word polis, meaning a city of what today would be equivalent of sovereign state. And the word science comes from the Latin scire, which means to know. Now, there are 3 main scopes of political science. 1 is political theory, 2 is public law, and 3rd, public administration. Let us know one by one of these 3 scopes of political science. Let's start with political theory. When we talk about political theory, it refers to the entire body of doctrines relating to the origin, form, behavior, and purposes of the state which are dealt with the study of political theory. So, in understanding the nature and the different phenomena that are happening in our political structure, we need political theory to at least understand and relate with our present condition. Now, when we talk about the second scope, which is the public law talks about the origin or the organization of the governments, the limitations upon the government authority, the powers and duties of governmental offices and officers, and the obligations of one state to another, which are handled in the study of public law. So public law is usually concentrated and focused by law students, particularly those law students or lawyers focusing and specializing in the public international law. And there are also branches of public laws that they are specializing, like revised penal code or the criminal law. We have the public officers laws, the election laws, the civil code, and the like. So there are a lot of laws belonging to the public law as one of the scopes of political science. The third one is the private law. So let's try to differentiate the public law and the private laws. Now, when we say about private laws, these are one which govern the relations among individuals. So while public law is so specialized that separate courses offered in each of its subdivisions, namely, as what I made mention, the constitutional law, the administrative law, and the international law. Now, the last scope of political science is the public administration. The public administration pertains to the attention which focused upon methods and techniques used in the actual management of the state affairs by executive, legislative, and judicial branches of the government. So, primarily, public administration is more focused on how public or the government or the state delivers its services and programs towards the public, and how the public react to that, and how public give feedback to the government. So mainly, there are three branches of the government which compose the entire government, which are the executive, legislative, judicial branches. And we will be dealing more on these three further, and we will be knowing what are their main and basic functions in the government. Now, let's proceed to the concept of state. We often and we usually hear the word state, but we seldom know what is its real meaning. So in this topic, let us try to unleash and discover what is a state. So a state is a community of persons more or less numerous, permanently occupying a definite portion of territory, having a government of their own, to which the great body of inhabitants render obedience and enjoying freedom from external control. Now, when you look closely to the definition of the state, you will be learning that there are elements inside its definition. Now, what are these elements that I am talking with or about? These elements are the people, the territory, the government, and the sovereignty. But what are these four elements? Now, let's try to discover. First, let's discuss about the first element, which is people. People refers to the mass of population living within the state. There is no requirement as to the number of the people that should compose a state. But we have to remember, guys, that it should be neither too small nor too large, small enough to be well-governed, and large enough to be self-sufficing. The smallest state is Vatican, and the biggest state is China, having the largest population. Now, when we talk about territory, there are four main components of territory. One is the terrestrial, or the landmass. Two, the aerial. Third, the fluvial, or what we call internal waters. And the fourth one is the maritime domain. Now, the smallest state is Vatican State with an area of 0.43 square kilometers. It would fit in Rizal Park in Manila. The biggest state is Canada, with an area of 3,852,000 square miles, which covers a surface nearly as large as Europe. Now, the third element of the state is the government. The government refers to the agency through which the will of the state is formulated, expressed, and carried out. The fourth one is the sovereignty. It is the supreme power of the state to command and enforce obedience to its will from people within its jurisdiction and to have freedom from foreign control. Before we proceed to the next topic, let us always remember the four elements of the state. Take note that if one of these elements will cease to exist, the entire state also will cease to exist. Now let's proceed to the forms of government. The principal forms of the government are the following. 1. As to the number of persons exercising sovereign powers. 2. As to the extent of powers exercised by the central or national government. 3rd, as to the relationship between the executive and the legislative branches of the government. 4th, as to the source of power or authority. First, as to the number of persons exercising sovereign powers, we have the government by one, which is a monarchy, or one in which the supreme and final authority. A monarchy is a form of government in which one person has the hereditary right to rule as head of state during his or her lifetime. The term is also applied to the state so governed. The monarchs include such rulers as kings and queens, emperors and empresses, czars and kaisers. There are two types of monarchical government. One is absolute monarchy, or one in which the ruler rules by divine right, and the second one is a limited monarchy, or one in which the ruler rules in accordance with a constitution. We need to take note that the power of the monarch varies from absolute to very limited. The latter is exemplified in modern-day constitutional monarchies. The other one is authoritarian, or one in which the supreme power of the dictator, whose power is usually through force. 1. Strict and demanding obedience, favoring strict rules and established authority. Let us now proceed to the government by few. Example of this is an aristocracy, or one in which political power is exercised by few privileged class. Usually, these are the people of highest social class, people of noble families, or the highest social class. 2. Superior group, or a group believed to be superior to all others of the same kind. 3rd, government by elite, government of a country by a small group of people, especially a hereditary nobility. 4th, state run by elite, a state governed by an aristocracy. On the other hand, we have also the so-called oligarchy. Oligarchy is a small governing group, a small group of people who together govern a nation or control an organization, often for their own purposes. Entity ruled by oligarchy is a nation governed or an organization controlled by an oligarchy. It is also a government by small group, a government or control by a small group of people. The difference between aristocracy and oligarchy: the aristocracy serves the purpose of helping the poor people by the elite, while the oligarchy is the corrupt form of aristocracy, which means oligarchy is a government of few, but their main purpose is for self-gratification and invested with self-interest, and not for the interest of the poor people. Now let's proceed to the government by many. So the common government form is democracy, or one in which political power is exercised by the majority of the people. It is further classified into As to the extent of powers exercised by the central or national government, we have the unitary government, or one in which the control of national and local affairs is exercised by the national government. In the Philippines, we are currently following the unitary form of government. The second one is a federal government. This is the one that is being pushed by the current administration of Duterte to be employed in the Philippines, which is the same in the United States of America's form of democratic government. A federal government is one in which the powers of the government are divided between two sets of organs, one for national affairs and the other for local affairs, each organ being supreme within its sphere. As the relationship between the executive and the legislative branches of the government, we have the parliamentary government or the cabinet government. It is one in which the executive and legislative branch of the government are dependent, or executive branch is part of the legislative branch. Why? Because the members of the executive branch are also members of the legislative department. Because among the legislative department members, they will be electing who will be acting as the prime minister. So the prime minister will be sitting or leading the executive branch. But we need to remember that that particular person who is acting or sitting as the prime minister is also a member of the legislative department. Thus, in a parliamentary form of government, there is a union or a marriage between the legislative and the executive branches of the government. On the other hand, we have also the presidential form of government, or one in which the state makes the executive independent from the legislative. So in the presidential form of government, the executive and the legislative are totally separated because the executive members are mostly elected, particularly the president and the vice president, and the members of the cabinets are actually appointed by the president, which are not usually members and should not be members of the legislative branch as well. Okay. So, as to the source of power, we have also here the de facto, which is one not so constituted or founded with the existing constitution, but has the general support of the people and has the effective control of the territory over which it exercises its powers. The best example of a de facto government is during the government of Corazon Aquino after she successfully ousted, together with those who demonstrated in EDSA, the regimen of Marcos. So, our Constitution, under 1973 Constitution, mentions that we elect our president. But in that case, we did not elect our president, but we appointed our president after a successful revolution, the so-called People Power EDSA revolution. So it is de facto because it deviated to what the supreme law of the land, the Constitution, mentioned as to how we change our president. But later part, because of the creation of the 1987 Constitution, the administration of Corazon Aquino was considered as the de jure government. Now, what is de jure government? A de jure government is one which is constituted or founded in accordance with the existing constitution of the state, but has no control of the territory. Now, let us further discuss about the hereditary and elective. The hereditary and elective are forms also of transmitting power. Hereditary, which means that it's by bloodline, and elective is through an election. What is the concept of checks and balances? In a presidential form of government and in a democratic form of government where there is separation of the three branches of government, the principle of checks and balances is always present. The doctrine and practice of dispersing political powers and creating mutual accountability among political entities such as the courts, the president or the prime minister, the legislature, and the citizens. The primary purpose of having checks and balances is to ensure that none of the three branches of the government become tyrannic or abuse its own power and affect or discriminate other branches of the government. For example, the President can veto an act of Congress. A two-thirds majority in Congress can then override the President's veto. The President appoints major federal officials, but only if the Senate by majority vote agrees. Since I mentioned about separation of powers, this doctrine and practice of dividing the powers of the government among different branches to guard against abuse of authority. A government of separated powers assigns different political and legal powers to the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. So we have to take note that when we say legislative branch, it has the power to make, formulate, enact, create laws, while the executive branch has the authority to administer the law primarily by bringing lawbreakers to trial and to appoint officials and oversee the administration of government responsibilities. In other words, the executive branch is the one responsible for implementing or enforcing the laws created by the legislative department, which means it is very clear in this discussion that the primary role of the legislative branch is just to enact or create laws, and they have nothing to do with the execution or the implementation of the law, because that particular job is the sole function of the executive branch. Meanwhile, the judicial branch has the power to try cases brought to court and to interpret the meaning of laws under which the trials are conducted. To make it short, the judicial branch has two main functions: to apply and interpret the laws created by the legislative and implemented by the executive branch. A government of separated powers is less likely to be tyrannical and more likely to follow the rule of law, the principle that government action must be constrained by laws. We have to remember that we are the government of laws and not rules by men. So we have to always follow the rule of law and not rule of men. A separation of powers also can make a political system more democratic by making it more difficult for a single ruler, such as a monarch or a president, to become dictatorial. We have three inherent powers of the state and government. One is the police power, second is the power of eminent domain, and third is the power of taxation. Now, when we say police power, a state power to preserve the peace and public order through the use of police force and criminal laws that restrain or regulate personal freedom and property rights. Second, the power of eminent domain is the power of the state to take private property for public use with just compensation and, of course, the due process. The power of taxation is the levying revenues to support for the expenses of the government. This is also considered as the lifeblood of the government. Lifeblood of the government because the government cannot work and cannot prioritize or concretize their projects and their activities without the money coming from the taxation. There are two functions of the government under our Constitution. One is the constituent function, and the second is the ministrant function. Now, when we say constituent function, this is the function to protect the people through the law enforcers and laws which primarily protects the life, liberty, and property of every individual. This function of the government can be manifested through the various laws created by the legislative and implemented by the executive pertaining to the protection of every individual when it comes to their life, liberty, and property. Meanwhile, when we say ministrant function, this is the function to serve the people through various services and programs initiated by the government to advance the welfare of the people, such as the educational services, the health services, transportation, cultural services, etc. Now let us try to understand what is political ideology, or what are political ideologies. These are certain set of ethical ideals, principles, doctrines, myths, or symbols of a social movement, institution, and class that explains how society should work and offers some political and cultural blueprint for a certain social order. Now let us discuss some of the political ideologies that we commonly hear and encounter with. One is conservatism, a general state of mind that is averse to rapid change and innovation and strives for balance and order, while avoiding extremes. Originally, conservatism arose as a reaction against the age of enlightenment. Conservative people, they do not totally hate change. They want change, but in a gradual manner, not in a rapid or abrupt manner. Democracy, a political system in which the people of the country rule through any form of government they choose to establish. Socialism, economic and social doctrine which pertains to a political movement inspired by this doctrine and system or order established when this doctrine is organized in a society. We can say that we have a socialist or we follow a socialism if we allow our government or our state own majority of the corporations or industries in the country. So that is one manifestation that there is socialism in a certain government. Capitalism. Capitalism is an economic system in which private individuals and business firms carry on the production and exchange of goods and services through a complex network of prices and markets. In capitalism, so long as you have the capital, you could open your business. So this pertains to free trade and free enterprises. Communism, on the other hand, is a theory and system of social and political organization that was a major force in world politics for much of the 20th century. Now let us proceed to the different kinds of the Constitution. We have, as to the form, we have written Constitution, one which has been reduced in writing at a particular time, fashioned out usually by a constitutional convention. Our Constitution, the 1987 Philippine Constitution, is an example of a written Constitution. Unwritten Constitution, one that is a product of political evolution, both in form and in substance, not inaugurated at any specific time and changing by accretion rather than by systematic method. The English Constitution is an example of an unwritten Constitution. As to the origin, we have cumulative or evolved. When we say cumulative or evolved, one where it has its origin mainly on customs, commonly law principles, and decisions of courts. It is a product of historical evolution and growth rather than of deliberate and formal enactment. Convention or enactment, one that is a product of deliberate assembly and consciously adopted formally. Philippine Constitution is an example of a convention or enacted constitution. As to the modality of amendment, we have rigid, one that cannot be amended except by the very procedure spelled out in that charter itself, which is rigid. The Philippine Constitution is a rigid constitution as being enshrined under its provisions in the 1987 Constitution. Flexible, one which possesses no higher legal authority than ordinary laws which can be amended easily. Most countries in Europe follow the flexible constitution. What are the requisites of a good constitution? One, it must be broad, it must be outlined, an organization of the government of the whole state. Second, it must be brief. It is a document that should not be too detailed in form. Third, it must be definite. Clarity and definiteness are indispensable ingredients of a constitution. Now let us proceed to the 1987 Philippine Constitution. As you can see, we have here the preamble, which introduces the Constitution and the source of sovereignty, the people, and it follows the pattern in past constitutions, including an appeal to God. The preamble reads, "We, the sovereign Filipino people, imploring the aid of Almighty God in order to build a just and humane society and establish a government that shall embody our ideals and aspirations, promote the common good, conserve and develop our patrimony, and secure to ourselves and our posterity the blessings of independence and democracy under the rule of law and a regime of truth, justice, freedom, love, equality, and peace, do ordain and promulgate this Constitution." Our 1987 Constitution is composed of 18 articles. These are Article 1, the National Territory; Article 2, Declaration of Principles and State Policies; Article 3, Bill of Rights; Article 4, Citizenship; Article 5, Suffrage; Article 6, Legislative Department; Article 7, Executive Department; Article 8, Judicial Department; Article 9, Constitutional Commissions; Article 10, Local Government; Article 11, Accountability of Public Officers; Article 12, National Economy and Patrimony; Article 13, Social Justice and Human Rights; Article 14, Education, Science and Technology, Arts, Culture, and Sports; Article 15, the Family; Article 16, General Provisions; Article 17, Amendments or Revisions; and finally, Article 18, Transitory Provisions. Let us now discuss first Article 1, the National Territory. The National Territory comprises the Philippine Archipelago with all the islands and waters embraced therein, and all other territories over which the Philippines has sovereignty or jurisdiction, consisting of its terrestrial, fluvial, and aerial domains, including its territorial sea, the seabed, the subsoil, the insular shelves, and other submarine areas, the waters around, between, and connecting the islands of the archipelago, regardless of their breadth and dimensions, form part of the internal waters of the Philippines. Now let us proceed to Article 2, the Declaration of Principles and State Policies. Article 2 lays out the basic social and political creed of the Philippines, particularly the implementation of the Constitution, and sets forth the objectives of the government. Some essential provisions are: 1. The Philippines is a democratic republic. We have to remember also that the Philippines renounce of war as a form of national policy. So meaning we do not engage into war. But when it comes to defensive war, we tend to defend our country. But we cannot initiate war as part of our national policy. Supremacy of civilian over military authority. That's the main reason why our president is a civilian, to fulfill this particular provision of our Constitution. The separation of church and the state, that the state cannot support and establish a particular religion because we have a separation of church and state. The pursuit of an independent foreign policy. So our Constitution mandates that our foreign policy should be independent, free from external pressures or internal pressures. Abrogation of nuclear weaponry, which means that we do not subscribe or we do not allow our country to have a nuclear weapon. Family as the basic unit of the state, the role of the youth and women in nation building, the autonomy of local governments, the equal opportunity for public services, and prohibition of political dynasties in the country. Now, on the other hand, Article 3, the Bill of Rights, enumerates specific protections against the abuse of state power, most of which are similar to the provisions of the U.S. Constitution. Some essential provisions are: 1. A right to due process and equal protection of law. A right against searches and seizures without a warrant issued by a competent or judge of a jurisdiction. A right to privacy, a right to freedom of speech and expression, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, and the right to petition. The free exercise of a religion, a right of abode, and the right to travel, a right to information on matters of public concern, a right to form associations, a right to free access to courts, the right to remain silent and to have competent legal counsel, a right to habeas corpus, a right to speedy trial, the right against self-incrimination, the right to political beliefs and aspirations, a prohibition against cruel, degrading, or inhuman punishment, protection against imprisonment from death, the right against double jeopardy, the prohibition of ex post facto laws, and the bills of attainder. Now let us proceed to Article 4, the citizenship. So Article 4 defines the citizenship of Filipinos. It enumerates two kinds of citizens, which are the natural-born citizens and naturalized citizens. The natural-born citizens are those who are citizens from birth without having to perform any act to acquire or perfect Philippine citizenship. The Philippines follows a jus sanguinis system where citizenship is mainly acquired through blood relationship with Filipino citizens. Natural-born citizenship forms an important part of political system, as only natural-born Filipinos are eligible to hold high offices, including all elective offices beginning with the representative in the House of Representatives up to the President. Article 5, the suffrage, provides for the qualification to vote and for a system of the secrecy of the ballot and absentee voting, and mandates a procedure for the disabled and illiterate to vote. Article 6, which is the legislative department, provides for a bicameral legislature called the Congress, composed of the Senate and the House of Representatives. It vests upon Congress, among others, 1. The power of investigation and inquiry in aid of legislation. 2. The power to declare the existence of a state of war. 3. The power of the purse. 4. The power of taxation. 5. The power of eminent domain. So here, we have the qualifications of our congressmen. As to the senators, we have natural-born citizen, at least 35 years old, at least 2 years of residency in the Philippines, able to read and write, and a registered voter. Meanwhile, on the district representatives, it requires that a district representative must be a natural-born citizen, at least 25 years old, at least 1 year of residency in the Philippines, able to read and write, and a registered voter. Article 7, which is the executive department, provides for a presidential form of government where the executive power is vested on the president. It provides for the qualification, terms of office, election, and power and functions of the president. It also provides for a vice president and for the presidential line of succession. In other words, both the president and the vice president have the same qualifications, which are 1. Natural-born citizen, 2. At least 40 years old, 3. At least 10 years of residency in the Philippines, 4th, able to read and write, and 3rd, a registered voter. Article 8 is the Judicial Department, which vests the judicial power upon the Supreme Court and other lower courts as may be established by law or by Congress. While the power to appoint justices and judges still reside with the President may only appoint nominees pre-selected by the Judicial and Bar Council, a body composed of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, the Secretary of Justice, the chairs of the Senate and House Committees on Justice, and representatives from the legal profession. Article 9, the Constitutional Commissions, establishes 3 constitutional commissions, which are the Civil Service Commission, or the CSC, the Commission on Elections, or the COMELEC, and the Commission on Audit, or the COA, or COA. Article 10, which pertains to local government, pursues for local autonomy and mandates Congress to enact a law for the local government. Now, currently, the Local Government Code, or the Republic Act, number 7160. Article 11, the accountability of public officers. Article 11 establishes the Office of the Ombudsman, which is responsible for investigating and prosecuting government officials. It also vests upon the Congress the power to impeach the President, the Vice President, the members of the Supreme Court, members of the Constitutional Commission, and the Ombudsman. Article 12, the national economy and patrimony. Article 12 sets a framework for an economy that is effectively controlled by Filipinos. These include requirements that at least 60% of corporations be owned by Filipinos. Let us now familiarize ourselves with the various political terminologies that we have previously encountered. Now let us take a close look to each of them. We have the writ of habeas corpus, the writ of habeas data, the writ of amparo, the writ of certiorari, the writ of mandamus, the writ of quo warranto, reprieve, commutation, pardon, amnesty, initiative, referendum, plebiscite, and martial law. Let's start with the writ of habeas corpus. A writ of habeas corpus is a court order that commands an individual or a government official who has restrained another to produce the prisoner at a designated time and place so that the court can determine the legality of the custody and decide whether to order the prisoner's release. While the writ of habeas data is a remedy available to any person whose right to life, liberty, and security is violated or threatened with violation by an unlawful act or omission of a public official or employee or of a private individual or entity engaged in collecting, gathering, or storing of data or information regarding the person, family, home, and correspondence of the aggrieved party. The writ of amparo. This is a remedy available to any person whose right to life, liberty, and security is violated or threatened with violation by an unlawful act or omission of a public official or employee or of a private individual or entity. The writ shall cover extrajudicial killings and enforced disappearances or threats. Writ of certiorari. An order coming from a higher court demanding the lower court to produce the court proceedings of a specific case decided by it. Writ of mandamus. A high court order commanding an individual, organization, administrative tribunal, or court to perform a certain action, usually to correct an earlier action or failure to fulfill some duty. Writ of quo warranto. It is not a petition but a notice of demand issued by a demandant to a respondent claiming some delegated power and filed with the court of competent jurisdiction to hold a hearing within 3 to 20 days, depending on the distance of the respondent to the court, present proof of his authority to execute his claimed powers. Reprieve is a mere postponement of punishment. Commutation is the mitigation of punishment. So let us try to take a look at the differences between pardon and amnesty. Pardon is a term as pity and forgiveness for a criminal, while amnesty is an absolution and forgetfulness of a political offense. Pardon is given by the President, and this is absolutely allowed by the Constitution. Amnesty, the President can give this, but with one-third concurrence from the Congress. Pardon, it can be given to an individual, but amnesty, it is applicable to a group of people. Pardon can only be allowed under criminal offenses, while amnesty is allowed under political offenses. People who usually ask for amnesty are the rebels or the members of New People's Army. Initiative, a procedure by which a specified number of voters may propose a statute, law created by the Congress, or the constitutional amendment or ordinance and compel a popular vote on its adoption. Referendum refers to the procedure where an issue is presented to the people for their verdict. This is also may take another form when a decision is taken by the legislature, but it can be enforced only when people have their verdict, a provision that is often applicable to approval of laws and policies by the people, including constitutional amendment. Plebiscite is used to allow people to vote for the acceptance or approval of the new constitution. Martial law is the imposition of direct military control of normally civilian functions of government, especially in response to a temporary emergency such as invasion, rebellion, and when public safety requires it. Let us now proceed to the basic principles of economics. What is economics? Economics is the social science concerned with the problem of scarcity. What is scarcity then? It means there is no enough resources to meet the demand. What else is economics? Economics is said to be the science of decision making. But to formally define what economics is, the social science concerned with how individuals and societies decide how to satisfy their unlimited wants given our limited resources. Now let's proceed to the discussion on the production of possibilities curve. Graphs showing the maximum combination of goods and services that can be produced from a fixed amount of resources in a given period of time. Because for all we know that resources are limited and we are only able to use so much of them to produce certain goods. What are the factors of production? One, we have the natural resources, which is the land. This is free gifts of nature, such as land, minerals, oil, forests, air, and timber. Capital resources, manufactured aids to production, like tools, machine, equipment, factories. These are things used in producing goods and services and getting them to consumers. Human resources or labor, mankind's physical and mental talent. These are the skills people have that are used to produce goods and services. Entrepreneur, the individual who combines the factors of production in order to produce a good service, like risk taker, policymaker, and innovator. What is an opportunity cost? A true cost of choosing one alternative over the other. This is sometimes called as trade-offs, giving up one thing in order to obtain another. The one that you give up when the choice is made is what we call the opportunity cost. Give an example of a time when you had to make an economic choice. What was the opportunity cost? The opportunity cost is the opportunity loss. Let's say, for example, you are asked by your mother to choose between a laptop and a cell phone. You choose a laptop and you gave up cell phone. So your opportunity cost is the cell phone. That is, to get the laptop, you have to give up your cell phone. That is an example of an opportunity cost. Let's proceed to the types of economics. We have two types of economics, the macroeconomics and the microeconomics. The macroeconomics is a branch of economics that deals with economic theory and economic decisions of large bodies like the government, theories of economics, countries and their governments, trade between countries. That's the concern of macroeconomics. Like in a microeconomics, this is the branch of economics that deals with behavior and decisions of smaller units like individuals and businesses, like families, businesses, and communities. This also includes domestic economies. So this is a business cycle. So let's say a business has its own peak. So it has the glorious moment of the business. So in due time, it will experience a recession wherein there is a dramatic decline of its growth until it will be on the deepest part, which is the throw. And then from the throw, it will also have its recovery until it will arrive to its peak, and then recession, throw, and then recovery and peak. So this is what we call the business cycle. What are the parts of business cycle? The peak or the boom, the highest point in the economic cycle. Economy is at its best and will likely begin to contract. Recession or contraction is the decline in the economy's performance that could lead to depression. Not long-term and does not always impact other economies. The depression or the throw is a sustained economic downturn that impacts our economy and that of other countries, lowest economic point. The recovery or the expansion is the economic activity begins to pick up and depression begins to end. The economic growth occurs during the recovery period. There are three basic economic questions that we should always put in mind. One, what to produce. With limited resources, deciding what is needed the most is often a factor in determining what will be produced. What is the need or want of this product? What is the point of making a product that no one is going to buy? Businesses need to make money, so they choose products that people want. How should it be produced? Technology, labor, capital, etc. Getting the lowest cost to make the product. So are we going to make the product from scratch or will a machine be making the product? What will each option cost? Will having a new technology allow us to lower our expenses? Whom should it be produced for? This is another question that we need to take into consideration. Who is going to use this product? Did Apple market the iPod to the large population of elderly people in the US or the youth? Why? Most goods and services are distributed to individuals through a price system. If you want it and can afford to buy it, you will. Products can also be distributed through other means, forwards, first-come lottery, majority, etc. Now let's understand the word inflation. When we say inflation, the rate of which the general level of prices for goods and services is rising and subsequently purchasing power is also falling. As inflation rises, every dollar will buy a smaller percentage of a good. For example, if the inflation rate is 2%, then a $1 pack of gum will cost $1.02 in a year. How about recession? A recession is significant decline in activity across the economy, lasting longer than a few months. It is visible in industrial production, employment, real income, and wholesale retail trade. The technical indicator of a recession is 2 consecutive quarters of negative economic growth as measured by a country's gross domestic product or GDP. A recession generally lasts from 6 to 18 months, and interest rates usually fall in during these months to stimulate the economy by offering cheap rates at which to borrow money. Let us proceed to the supply and demand. The law of demand states that other things equal as the price of a good or service rises, its quantity demanded falls. The reverse is also true as the price of a good or service falls, its quantity demanded increases. Take a look in this graph. This is what we call the demand curve. As you can see, as the price decreases, the quantity demanded increases in this particular graph. The demand curve has a negative slope consistent with the law of demand. The law of supply holds that other things equal, as the price of a good rises, its quantity supplied will rise and vice versa. Why do producers produce more output when prices rise? Because they seek higher profits and they can cover higher marginal cost of production. Try to look at this graph. As you can see, as the price is falling, the quantity supplied also is falling. So meaning, if the price is declining, the producers are most likely not to produce a lot because of the declining price of the commodity. Thus, the supply curve has a positive slope consistent with the law of supply. Let's try to understand equilibrium. In economics, an equilibrium is a situation in which there is no inherent tendency to change. Quantity demanded is equal to quantity supplied and the market just clears. Just try to look at this graph. As you can see, at a certain point in our graph, there will be a moment wherein in a certain price, the quantity demanded and quantity supplied is equal. There, equilibrium occurs at the price of $3 and quantity of 30 units. What about shortages and surpluses? We often hear these two words, but what do these words really mean? A shortage occurs when quantity demanded exceeds quantity supplied. A shortage implies the market price is too low. A surplus occurs when quantity supplied exceeds quantity demanded. A surplus implies that the market price is too high. Try to look at this shift in demand curve. A shift in demand curve is a change in any variable other than price that influences quantity demanded, produces a shift in the demand curve, or a change in demand. Factors that shift the demand curve include change in consumer incomes, population change, consumer preferences, prices of related goods, and substitutes like goods consumed in place of one another, and complements goods consumed jointly. For example, a tea and coffee can be substitutes. Meanwhile, SIM card and cell phones are complements. They are complements because you cannot use cell phones without SIM card and vice versa. Try to look at the shift in the demand curve. This demand curve has shifted to the right, so the quantity demanded is now higher at any given price. You can pause the video if you want to study further the graph. Meanwhile, the equilibrium after a demand shift will look like this. The shift in the demand curve moves the market, the equilibrium from point A to point B, resulting in a higher price and higher quantity. Again, you can pause the video if you want to study further the graph. Shift in supply curve. A change in any variable other than price that influences quantity supplied produces a shift in the supply curve or a change in supply. The factors that shift the supply curve include 1. Change in input costs, 2. Increase in technology, and 3. Change in size of the industry. Try to look at this shift in the supply curve. For a given rental price, quantity supplied is now lower than before. Try to look at and study the graph. You can pause the video if you want to study further. This one is equilibrium after a supply shift. The shift in the supply curve moves the market equilibrium from point A to point B, resulting in a higher price and lower quantity. Try to look at the graph. So if you need more time, you can pause the video. Now let's try to understand price ceilings and floors. The price ceiling is a legal maximum that can be charged for a good, results in a shortage of a product. Common examples include apartment rentals and credit cards interest rates. A price floor is a legal minimum that can be charged for a good, results in a surplus of a product, and a common example includes soybeans, milk, minimum wage. We're done with the principle of economics. Let's try to understand cooperatives. A cooperative is an autonomous association of persons united voluntarily to meet their common economic, social, and cultural needs and aspirations through a jointly owned and democratically controlled enterprise. So what are the principles of cooperatives? 1, it is a voluntary and open membership. 2, democratic member control. 3, member of economic participation. 4, autonomy and independence. 5, it provides education, training, and information to its members. 6, cooperation among cooperatives. And 7, concern for community. Take note that a cooperative is democratically controlled by members. The people who own and control and finance the cooperatives are those who use it. Democratic member control is exercised by 1, voting at annual and membership meetings. 2, electing board of directors. 3, making decisions on major cooperative issues. And the cooperative values that we need to learn from cooperatives are self-help, self-responsibility, democracy, equality, equity, and solidarity. Ownership and purposes. We have the worker-owned cooperative, which the individual members are both workers and employees of the jointly owned cooperative enterprise. Its purpose is to provide employment to its members. The user-owned cooperative. Members have their own enterprise or household and use the cooperative for joint supply, marketing, finance, housing, etc. Its purpose is to provide services to its members. The structure of cooperation. Co-ops can economically cooperation by geography. We have local, regional, provincial, national, and international. So we will be understanding each structure of cooperatives by its name alone. Now when we say local, it's organized on a municipality level. Regional, organized at district or metro levels. Provincial, organized by numbers of districts and metros. National, organized by provinces. And international, organized by national co-op movements. Let's proceed to the types of cooperatives. We have the credit cooperative, which is one that promotes and undertakes savings and lending services among its members. It generates a common pool of funds in order to provide financial assistance and other related financial services to its members for productive and provident purposes. Consumer cooperative is one primary purpose of which is to procure and distribute commodities to members and non-members. Producers cooperative is one that undertakes joint production, whether agricultural or industrial. Marketing cooperative is one which engages in the supply of production, inputs to members, and markets their products. Service cooperative is one engages in medical and dental care, hospitalization, transportation, insurance, housing, labor, electric light and power, communication, professional, and other services. We have also the multi-purpose cooperative, which is one combines two or more of the businesses' activities of these different types of cooperatives. The advocacy cooperative is a primary cooperative which promotes and advocates cooperativism among its members and the public through socially oriented projects, education and training, research and communication, and other similar activities to reach out to its intended beneficiaries. Agrarian Reform Cooperative is one organized by marginal farmers, majority of which are agrarian reform beneficiaries, for the purpose of developing an appropriate system of land tenure, land development, land consolidator, or land management in areas covered by agrarian reform. Cooperative Bank is one organized for the primary purpose of providing a wide range of financial services to cooperatives and their members. Dairy Cooperative is one whose members are engaged in the production of fresh milk, which may be processed and or marketed as dairy products. Education Cooperative is one organized for the primary purpose of owning and operating licensed educational institutions, notwithstanding the provisions of Republic Act No. 9155, otherwise known as the Governance of Basic Education Act of 2001. Electric Cooperative is one organized for the primary purpose of undertaking power generation, utilizing renewable energy sources, including hybrid systems acquisitions and operation of sub-transmission or distribution to its household members. Financial Service Cooperative is one organized for the primary purpose of engaging in savings and credit services and other financial services. Fishermen Cooperative is one organized by marginalized fishermen in localities whose products are marketed either as fresh or processed products. Health Services Cooperatives is one organized for the primary purpose of providing medical, dental, and other health services. Housing Cooperative is one organized to assist or provide access to housing for the benefit of its regular members who actively participates in the savings program for housing, and it is co-owned and controlled by its members. Insurance Cooperative is one engaged in the business of insuring life and property of cooperatives and their members. Transport Cooperatives is one which includes land and sea transportation limited to small vessel as defined or classified under the Philippine Maritime Laws, organized under the provision of this code. Water Service Cooperative is one organized to own, operate, and manage water system for the provision and distribution of potable water for its members and their households. Workers Cooperative is one organized by workers, including the self-employed, who are at the same time members and owners of the enterprise. Its principal purpose is to provide employment and business opportunities to its members and manage it in accordance with cooperative principles. And lastly, the other types of cooperative as may be determined by the authority. So, we will just discuss the taxation in the next part of this discussion. So, just wait for the part 2 of this discussion in order to complete the 259 slides. So, see you and thank you for your time. God bless us all.